Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to Coffee with Tom and Joanne. I'm Tom Matthews.
And I'm Joanne Toronto. Today we're talking about closings. It is the best part of the transaction, right? So, in theory, buyers come into buying real estate and they think the closing is some ceremonial, like passing of the keys. The buyers and the sellers sitting around a table with their representation, and everybody sharing a handshake or a hug at the end. And while I have attended closings that are like that, over the past 20 years, closings have really become much more business-like than a ceremonial meeting of the minds. So, Tom, when a seller has a closing, what does that typically look like?
So typically what we're seeing today, Joanne, is that the seller's attorney will either have them come into their office a week before the actual closing date and sign the deed in what we call a limited power of attorney. So that way the seller doesn't have to attend the closing. But like we have a lot of clients who are selling a second home because they've already moved to their new home. And like we have a client who was FedExed the deed in the power of attorney. They'll sign it at the bank, have it notarized, and then FedEx it back to the attorney. And they don't even attend the closing. So for them, it's out of sight, out of mind, and they just get a wire or a check from their closing attorney. But for the buyer, a little bit more intimate, a little bit more detailed. So Joanne, why don't you tell from a buyer's perspective, number one, how the buyer should dress, what the buyer should have, and what they should expect. How about that?
So when you are buying a home and you are attending a closing, you need to have a form of ID. So you need to bring your driver's license or your passport. You need to bring your personal checkbook in case there are any last minute adjustments at the closing. And you also need to make sure that you have already wired your funds into your closing attorney's IOLTA account. That is a special type of bank account that real estate attorneys have, that they're able to wire funds very quickly between two locations. And it's where the escrow monies are held. So they are what's called fully funded. So they've received the money from, if you're getting a mortgage, from the mortgage company, and they've received a wire from you for either the remaining down payment or the full purchase price. Once they're funded, you will have a closing time that is scheduled. You'll take care of the final walkthrough, walking through the property, and then you'll arrive at the closing, typically at the closing attorney's office, but you could really close anywhere. You could close in a coffee shop, you could close in the home that you're purchasing. A lot of times it's very comfortable to be in the attorney's office because they have all of their materials, their photocopy machine, their printer, all things that they need. A closing is very casual. So you don't need to wear a business suit or a dress. You can if you want to. But there's no dress code. You just come as you are. And basically the closing attorney will have a large stack of papers. Massachusetts loves papers. And you will sign a lot of different documents. We're not going to get into what all the documents are, but you're going to sign a lot of different documents. There may be a designated pen color for you to be using to sign these documents, a very specific way that you need to be signing your name according to what your legal name is. So lots of people think that this is something that takes a long time. I would say a closing is anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes tops. You are basically signing the papers to get the ownership of the property. And then you are leaving the closing attorney's office, still not owning the property. At what point, Tom, do you own the property and you can have the keys and go in?
So Joanne, you own the property when the funds are there, because you could have wired your money the night before, but the bank funds haven't been funded yet. So let's assume in a perfect world, your money is in the IOLTA account, the bank is funded, and you sign all the paperwork. Now the next step is that the deed has to be recorded. So right now, Massachusetts does allow for electronic filing. So another advantage to being in the real estate office is that if you sign the deed, the mortgage, the note, everything right away, the paralegal can come in and start scanning your documents. And then you get put into the queue. But once that deed is recorded, you now own the property. So if you want to walk out of the closing as the owner of the property, you should have your closing in the middle of the month when there are less closings. get in the queue, and you should be able to be on record by the time you're all done. However, typically we close at the end of the month because you have less prepaid interest on the property and on the closing documents. And then you go into a queue that can take a couple of hours. So I would say standard kind of operating practice is that if you sign at 9 a.m., you're done at 10, you should be on record by 2 p.m. And at 2 p.m., you are now the official owner and you have access to the property. Now, Joanne, what happens with the key? The key to the property. Are you walking away with the key, or do you have to get the key later in the day? How does that typically look?
So you need to get the key later in the day after the deed has been recorded. That is when you are the legal owner of the property and you can go in. So sometimes there is a key in a simple push button lockbox that's left at the property, and then you'll be given the code to that lockbox once the deed is on record. Something important to remember is that the registry closes at 4.
Yep.
So in some instances, I haven't seen this recently, but in some instances, you could be in the queue, which is the line waiting to be recorded, and the registry could close. And that's what we call not making it to record. So in that scenario, there are a couple of different options, and we're not going to get into those right now, but you could, if you're not on record by 4 p.m., it won't happen until the next morning. So it's important to have a plan B in case that happens. So regardless of how you want to do your closing, you want to do it in your attorney's office, you want to do it at the property, you want to do it at a coffee shop, you want to do it at your own personal home, it will take time to record the deed. And it's just important to remember that there is that lag time between signing the paperwork and actually having ownership of the property and receiving the keys.
Yeah, because you don't want to say I'm closing at 9 and my movers are showing up at 10:30, because your movers could be sitting there and then you're paying for its time on the truck. So it's really important as you get down to this final stage that you're having conversations with your broker, making sure that you're coordinating things. Our general practice is if you have to do the move on the same day, sign that paperwork as early in the morning as you can. And in the perfect world, sign and then move the next day, so that if things do happen, bank funding gets delayed. I mean, the biggest challenge with residential real estate is we live in the gray, and that means that things happen. So being better prepared for something going wrong is better than being under immense amount of stress because you just didn't plan properly. And that's why we're providing these videos. We want to give people that are thinking about buying a property some perspective so they can plan properly, have a fantastic experience buying and selling real estate, and really knowing what the process is all about.
Yeah, I think this was a great conversation. It's good to know that closings are low key, informal, and sometimes it's not everybody is there, and sometimes it's just the buyer and their attorney. So regardless of the experience that you have, the outcome is the same, that you get the keys to that home, hopefully that same day.
Awesome. Well, thank you for watching Coffee with Tom and Joanne. I'm Tom Matthews.
And I'm Joanne Toronto. Cheers.